I am a veteran with bad paper. In addition to the trauma of war, the experience of being discharged with a less than fully honorable discharge and the resulting denial of VA benefits has shaped my entire adult life. On May 15, 2005, my platoon was nearing the end of our routine patrol through Sadr City, Baghdad, when we were diverted away from returning to base. May 15th wasn't the first time that we got a call to assist Iraqi police officers as they picked up the bodies of murder victims to bring them to the morgue. This wasn't the first time that it was my job to photograph the bodies, take close-up photos of the lifeless faces, try to determine the cause of death, try to discern their identities, and to make futile attempts to come up with an explanation for the killings that I can include in my intelligence report. When we pulled up to the trash dump, it was apparent that this time was going to be different. Having heard about bodies being found, women and children from the city were already pouring onto the scene. On the one hand, they're hoping that it is their missing husband, brother, father, who's being found so that their family can finally get some closure. On the other hand, they're obviously hoping that it's not their family member who's been murdered, still hoping that they're alive. There's a small flatbed pickup that had already had a pile of bodies in it. I looked down into a pit and saw men tugging at the arms of a limp corpse that was only partly exposed, while other men attempted to dislodge the buried legs from the earth. There was a dead and decaying donkey to my left. Maggots squirmed under its skin. These bodies were buried in an unmanaged trash dump, which is surrounded by pools of raw sewage. We were told that there was something like 2 or 3 million people living in poverty in Sadr City, Baghdad, and that's where much of their waste ended up. I started performing my regular duties, gathering intelligence, writing down what I saw, talking to the police and witnesses through the interpreter, trying to figure out what the hell happened, hoping that somehow we, the U.S. Army, could be a force for justice for the victims of this massacre. A second truck was brought up to be filled with bodies. There were over a dozen in all. It was time for me to take pictures. I saw packaging tape that had been wrapped around their heads, covering their eyes, pulled tightly across their mouths. I saw signs of torture, gunshot wounds that looked like they were intended to injure but not kill. I saw coagulated blood, still fresh enough to drip, sling from one of their noses and onto me. I saw flies landing on the faces of victims of torture and murder. The buzzing was everywhere. As I took pictures, flies that had just been on corpses, a rotting animal, trash, and sewage landed on my own face. In the heat, they seemed extra fast, and they still landed quickly to sip moisture from the corners of my eyes, my nose, and my mouth, no matter how much I tried to swat them away. What I've described to you is just a small fraction of one single day after my patrol ended of my year-long deployment. I was 19 years old. A year later, while I was home in the U.S., I became an alcoholic. My roommate would frequently find me passed out in the shower under scalding hot water. I was trying to burn the smell of May 15, 2005, out of my mind and flesh, inside and out, because the rotten smell of death on top of trash, soaked in sewage, followed me home. I could still feel the flies landing on my face. My military career still went well, despite the things that I went through. I was promoted to the rank of sergeant in just about 2 years in service. Not only did I continue my duties as a forward observer, but I also was made communications sergeant for Alpha Company and charged with maintaining millions of dollars worth of equipment. I graduated from Warrior Leaders course among the top of my class. In May 2007, after struggling for months to obtain mental health treatment from the Army, I took a handful of Percocet and a bottle of vodka and tried to end my own life. Thankfully, my best friend and roommate had recognized my downward spiral and called the police. I was found unconscious and was rushed to the hospital. 3 months later, I was kicked out of the Army with a general discharge, a status that cost me my eligibility for the GI Bill. After having an otherwise stellar career, being well-liked both by my command and my peers, and exceeding every performance standard that the Army ever put in front of me, a staff sergeant issued 2 counseling statements to me, one for malingering, which is a medical diagnosis, and he had a high school education, and the other for missing movement, because my suicide attempt happened the night before my second deployment to Iraq. Those 2 counseling statements were all that it took to quickly kick me out of the Army and change the rest of my life. I found myself back in my childhood bedroom with no job, no hope, suicidal, drinking heavily nearly every day. The social stigma of my discharge status meant that I was a pariah among the men that had months before been like brothers to me, who I had lived with and shared everything with for the better part of 4 years. My childhood dream of serving in uniform turned out to be a nightmare, one that I couldn't escape, a nightmare that would follow me everywhere that I went. Because the Army interpreted my suicide attempt as an act of misconduct, not only did I could I not use my military experience on my resume, I didn't even qualify for unemployment insurance in the state of New York as the economy collapsed in 2007. I was eventually diagnosed with PTSD by the VA, and ever since I've been in the process of recovery. With a general discharge, I still qualified for VA health care, and that access to VA care is the only reason that I'm alive. I was lucky compared to the veterans that we're here to discuss today, those with other than honorable discharges. They have been systematically denied essential health care services because the VA reinterpreted the words that Congress put into the law with the 1944 GI Bill of Rights to reduce their workload and to save money. As of a couple years ago, there were 505,000 veterans living with other than honorable discharges in the United States. Those veterans have, for the most part, been denied all essential services, not just the GI Bill, but VA health care. My discharge made me ineligible for many of the fringe benefits that the average veteran receives. I've been barred from applying for most scholarships and fellowships that are dedicated to veterans. I didn't qualify for New York State's Veterans Tuition Award, and without the GI Bill, I've accumulated tens of thousands of dollars of school debt. But being public about bad paper has also led hundreds of people who've endured similar experiences to reach out to me and ask for help. And that's the other major factor that led me here today. It's been 13 years since my discharge from the U.S. Army. Since then, I've learned to manage my PTSD. I've gone to school, and after working my ass off, I managed to graduate from Columbia University with honors this past May. I've started a nonprofit called High Ground Veterans Advocacy, where I train veterans to use their military experience and personal stories to motivate Congress to enact legislative reforms. I came up with the budgetary trick to invent the forever part of the Forever GI Bill with your staff, ensuring that today's service members don't lose their eligibility because of some arbitrary time limit. I've intervened in more suicide attempts than I can count, answering phone calls, emails, text messages, and social media messages at all hours of the day and night from strangers and friends alike, many of whom should be calling the VA, but they've been denied care. I've become the face of bad paper, and with my story published in more than a dozen mainstream outlets and trade publications, I've been invited by both the Obama and the Trump administration to visit the White House to witness the signing of legislation that I've played a key part in advocating for. And it still took 12 years for my discharge to be upgraded by the Army. Although through all this frustration, I spent this time learning that I'm not alone and that there are major systemic flaws that allow patriots like me to serve and sacrifice for this country, only to be discarded like trash. Since I learned about this country's abandonment of veterans with bad paper, it's been my primary focus in life to see that things are made right. In 2016, I walked into a meeting in Senator Tom Tillis's office and met with his senior military advisor. After telling him my story and urging his boss to sign on to the Fairness for Veterans Act, he looked me in the eyes and said, "Son, you're doing the Lord's work." That man's name is Robert Wilkie. But as Secretary of Veterans Affairs, he's failed to prioritize veterans with bad paper. I can't figure out why, when given the chance, Secretary Wilkie won't pick up the torch and do the Lord's work by helping make our most vulnerable veterans a priority at the VA. The VA already has the statutory authority to care for veterans with bad paper, and more than enough reason to comply with the congressional intent of the authors of the original GI Bill of Rights. So I beg you, please do something big. Drag your colleagues along with you if you have to. Amend the GI Bill to at least protect all veterans with bad paper, as I was, to help us move forward in life.